You are bored right now. Maybe not this exact second, but sometime today, your mind went flat. You picked up your phone, you opened an app, you put it down and opened it again. You stared at a wall, you snacked when you weren't hungry. You felt a low, restless hum that you couldn't quite name, but you knew you wanted it to stop. That feeling is one of the oldest things about you. It did not arrive with smartphones. It did not arrive with television or radio or the printing press. It was there in the cave. It was there on the savannah. It was there 100,000 years ago when a human being sat under a wide open sky with nothing to do and felt exactly what you felt today. But here is what nobody tells you. What those ancient humans did next changed everything. It built language. It built art. It built religion and music and mythology. It built the entire inner world that makes you human. Boredom did not slow human history down. Boredom is what accelerated it. So what did ancient humans actually do when they were bored? The answer is stranger and more important than you would ever guess. Start with the basics. For the vast majority of human existence, something like 95% of our total time on this planet, your ancestors were hunter-gatherers. They moved in small bands, usually between 20 and 50 people. They hunted, they foraged, they ate, they slept. And when the food was handled and the fire was built and the predators were quiet, they had nothing to do. Anthropologist Marshall Sahlins coined a phrase for this in 1966 that became one of the most debated ideas in the history of human science. He called hunter-gatherer societies the original affluent society. His argument was simple and radical. These people were not grinding away in desperate survival. They worked, on average, somewhere between 3 and 5 hours a day to meet all of their needs. The rest of the time was theirs. Think about what that means. Your ancestors, the people whose DNA you carry, whose habits are baked into your nervous system, were not built for 9-hour workdays. They were not built for back-to-back meetings or inbox zero or the relentless productivity culture that tells you that every idle moment is wasted time. They were built for long stretches of unstructured time. They were built for boredom, and their brains knew exactly what to do with it. The first thing they did was talk. Not small talk, not status updates, real, sustained narrative talk. Anthropologist Polly Wiessner spent decades living with the Juhansi Bushmen of the Kalahari, one of the most studied hunter-gatherer groups on Earth, and she published a landmark study in 2014 analyzing what these communities actually talked about and when. What she found was striking. During the day, the conversations were practical: food, tools, complaints about other people, the daily logistics of survival. But when night came and the fire was burning and there was nothing left to do, the conversations transformed. 81% of nighttime talk was stories. Stories about people who weren't there. Stories about distant places and impossible events, and the interior emotional lives of human beings. Stories that required your listener to imagine something they couldn't see, to hold a fictional world inside their head and believe it, at least for a moment. Wiessner called this firelight talk. And she argued that this nightly ritual, born out of having nothing else to do, was one of the primary engines that built the human social brain. Theory of mind, the ability to understand that other people have thoughts and feelings different from your own, was not a given. It was practiced every night around the fire because there was nothing else to do. Boredom gave your ancestors the time to imagine other people, but they didn't stop at talk. Around 40,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened in human prehistory. Researchers call it the Great Leap Forward, though the term is contested. In a relatively short window of time, across multiple continents, humans began producing art. Not primitive scratches, real, intentional, breathtaking visual art. Cave paintings in Lascaux and Altamira, carved figurines from ivory, beads made from shells collected hundreds of miles from where they were found, musical instruments fashioned from vulture bone. All of it appeared in the archaeological record within roughly the same era. And paleoanthropologist Francesco Dorico has spent years studying these objects and pushing back the timeline further still, finding ochre pigments and engraved shells dating back over 100,000 years, long before the so-called creative explosion. What drove this? What made a human being pick up a piece of ochre and drag it across a stone? The most compelling answer is time. Idle time. Restless time. A mind with nothing urgent in front of it, starting to reach inward, starting to project its inner world onto the outer one. When your brain has nothing external to process, it does not go quiet. It has a default mode. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network, a connected system of brain regions that activates specifically when you are not focused on any task. This network is associated with daydreaming, with self-referential thinking, with imagining the future, with remembering the past, with constructing narratives about yourself and other people. In other words, your brain at rest is not resting, it is building. Researcher Mary Helen Immordino-Yang at the University of Southern California has studied the default mode network extensively and argues that this inward-turning mental state is not a bug, it is not laziness, it is not wasted time. It is where the deepest human capacities live. moral reasoning, empathy, long-range planning, the ability to imagine what your life will look like in 10 years and make choices today because of it. Your ancient ancestors activated this network every time the work was done and the sun was still up. You activate it when your phone is dead and you have nothing to look at. There is another thing your ancestors did when they were bored that you almost certainly still do today, though you probably do not connect the two. They played, not as children, as adults. Cross-cultural research on hunter-gatherer communities consistently finds that adult play is not unusual. It is expected. Tickling games, wrestling, improvisational performance, song contests where people try to one-up each other with increasingly absurd verses. These were not distractions from serious life. They were serious life. Play in adult mammals, primates especially, has been studied extensively, and researchers now understand it as a primary mechanism for social bonding, for stress regulation, and for practicing behaviors in a low-stakes context that might be needed in a high-stakes one later. When your ancestors sat around bored and someone started mimicking the way a grumpy elder walked, and everyone laughed, they were doing something neurologically profound. They were rehearsing social reading. They were practicing the art of reading a person, of capturing someone's essence in gesture and expression, of making other people see what you see. That is the same skill that became theater, that became comedy, that became every piece of performance art that has ever made a room erupt. Boredom did not produce laziness in ancient humans. It produced creativity, social intelligence, storytelling, play, and art. It produced every distinctly human thing we are most proud of. And then ask yourself what you did the last time you were bored. You reached for your phone. This is not a judgment. It is a mismatch. Your brain was not designed for a world where boredom is immediately solvable. It was designed for a world where boredom arrived like the tide, and you had to sit with it and let it move through you and see what it built when it did. Researcher Sandi Mann at the University of Central Lancashire ran a series of experiments asking whether boredom enhances creativity. In one study, participants who spent time doing a boring task, copying numbers from a telephone directory, subsequently generated significantly more creative uses for a pair of plastic cups than people who went straight into the creative task. The boredom had primed something. It had pushed the mind into a searching state, a reaching state, the same state your ancestor entered when the food was handled and the fire was low and the night was long. That state is still in you. It is waiting every time you put your phone down. The ancient human who got bored and started telling stories around a fire did not know they were doing anything important. They were just doing what the brain does when it has space. They were following the restless pull of a mind with nowhere to put itself, and they let it go somewhere extraordinary. You have that same brain. You carry the same pull. So the next time you feel that flat, restless hum, that low buzz that makes you reach for your screen, try something your ancestors did instead. Sit with it. Let it move. See what it builds. Because the most human things that have ever existed did not come from productivity. They came from boredom. Tonight, when your mind goes flat and that restless hum arrives, you will probably pick up your phone. But somewhere in the oldest part of your brain, a fire is still burning, and a story is waiting to be told.